Everybody's got a story. What's yours?
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 34 of Cool Story with David J. McNeil. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your continued support. This episode features a conversation with retired NHL defenseman Adrian Aucoin. I grew up in Blackburn Hamlet, a suburb of Ottawa, Canada, where hockey was king. Most of the boys I knew back in the day played hockey, and there were many very high-caliber players that came out of our neighborhood, several who went on to play pro hockey. Adrian Aucoin was one of those high achievers. During his career, Adrian played for a total of 7 NHL teams, logged in over 1,100 NHL games played, and retired at the age of 40. Pretty impressive. Here is my conversation with Adrian Aucoin. Hello, Adrian. How you doing?
All good.
Thanks so much for being on the podcast. This is pretty cool. I haven't seen you in a long time. Just for the listeners' sake, you and I grew up living across the street from each other in a place called Blackburn Hamlet, which is a suburb of Ottawa, the capital of Canada. And we spent a lot of time playing road hockey and other sports right out in front of our houses.
Yeah, well, I still, we get up to Ottawa, well, until COVID hit, at least once a year. My wife's family's all in Ottawa still. Most of my family members have all moved on, but I like to brag about Ottawa as a community where, second to none to bring up kids. And, to our credit, it kind of was what we did. We had fun. There was never too many big issues, and life was pretty good as I remember it.
Yeah, the thing that was really interesting about Blackburn Hamlet was I looked it up today that a lot of the houses I think were built, they finished building them around 67 and people started moving in then. So there was a whole slew of newly married couples who might have already had kids or would start families who were moving in all at the same time. So on any given day, you could run up the street and knock on a bunch of houses and have a dozen kids out playing road hockey in no time. There were so many kids around. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah, so you lived right at the end of High Park where we were. You were on West Park, and
Yeah.
High Park was a crescent, and there were so many kids on our street that we almost didn't even know kids on the other side of the street. There was probably maybe a good 10 families right within our 5-6 houses, that had at least a dozen to 20 kids. And so it was such an easy thing. And you get on your bike, you'd be 30 seconds away and it'd be a whole other pocket, and then there was another pocket. And I would almost guarantee that probably 75% of the community was children.
Yeah. Yeah, it was amazing. And so we played mostly a lot of street hockey out front. Yep. And then when we weren't doing that, your brother Mike and I also played lacrosse. And once in a while we try to play lacrosse on the street, which is just mostly chasing a ball forever or damaging somebody's car.
Yeah. No, the cool thing about street hockey too is I remember there was a family, the Searles near us, and there was a couple older ones at the corner further away from you that were even older than them. These guys were probably like 5-6 years older than me, so at least 3-4 years older than you. And they would play with us, and there's kids younger than us playing with us too. So it really wasn't like, me and my buddies playing, you and your buddies playing. Everything was intertwined. And of course, you were a year older than my brother. Then we had Rob, who was in between me and Mike. And it was just kind of, I guess, seamless that these kids, maybe we just didn't know any better at the time.
Yeah. Do you think, I guess all NHL players start out playing somewhere on the street with kids on the pond at the local. You probably played a bunch down at Emily Carr. They had the outdoor rink there as well.
Yep, all the time. One of the lucky things for us is like we talk about with all the siblings. So my best buddy at the time, Burke Murphy, who was also drafted in the NHL by the Flames, he had a brother, Sean Murphy, who you probably knew as well. And he was a really good player. He left Ottawa to go play at Princeton and then played pro in Europe a little bit. And I believe he was 4 years older than me. And Burke's dad, Pat Murphy, coached me from the age of 7 till I was 14. And he would build a backyard rink like we all would. But there would be anywhere from 5 to 20 kids in his backyard every day after school and weekends. And we would get tormented by Sean and his buddies because they were bigger, stronger, faster. And I think, honestly, that was one of the reasons why my group of friends ended up being decent at hockey is because we were always playing against the older kids, and it was at the same time it was a lot of fun, but we took a lot of bumps and bruises from those guys.
Hockey was very popular. It was a huge thing in Blackburn Hamlet. That was a big part of the community. There were a lot of great kids that played hockey in Blackburn at the time.
Yeah. Oh well, my age, my birth year, a couple of my best friends. So Steve Thornton, he actually runs Belfast Giants in the British Elite League. So he went to BU with me. Aaron Ward, he was drafted by the Red Wings, won a few Stanley Cups. Then we have guys that maybe weren't as well known, like Blake Martin, who actually at the time when we were kids might have been the best one of all of us. He played in the OHL, played a little bit of pro, and then expanding from there, we had Beacon Hill, Orleans, and that's where, my youth hockey team. I was just talking to a couple parents the other day. I think we had 9 kids from my youth team that ended up playing pro hockey, not necessarily the NHL, but it was just one of those birth years where we always had good coaching. We had a lot of fun, and we just kind of kept playing. It was, as a kid, when you're playing a sport and having fun, there's nothing better.
Yeah, no, Blackburn was, it was a pretty great place to grow up, and a big part of that is remembering all the different sports we played, whether it was hockey or lacrosse or baseball or t-ball or played tennis down off Innis Road or whatever. There was just so much to do for young people, and it was a time too when you'd get home from school, you'd throw your school bag in the back door, and then you'd run off, and then you'd be gone until the sun came down or dinner time or whatever. When I look back at it, I'm glad that we had the opportunity to experience that. We grew up during that era, and then moved into the internet era. We can kind of see how the world works in both of those eras, but I'm really glad that we had the opportunity to grow up at a time when it was so free and open like that.
Yeah, we were almost like little vagabonds. You get on your bike and you'd go to the corner store and you'd buy your little cigarette gums, that you kind of like, thought it was awesome. And we would just kind of be gone all the time. And then you'd wind up at someone's house for a little bit, and I know kids, it's funny, Mike. So I have 5 young kids. Well, not young anymore, but 5 kids. And it almost seems like my youngest is reverting back to that a little bit, because where we live here in Chicago, it's a little suburban community, and it's a pretty safe community, luckily. So they get on their bikes and they just kind of wander around quite a bit. I don't find that my older kids did that as much.
Mm-hmm.
And I would always tell them that's what we would do, like every day, because obviously, I think like Nintendo maybe just came out, ColecoVision and television, like a couple of video games, but we weren't playing on computers. Obviously, there was no internet or anything, no phones. So we would just have to go knock on doors, and it really opened up a lot of opportunities for us to have more fun.
In Blackburn Hamlet, the team that most of the kids played for was the Stingers. Did you ever play for the Stingers?
Yep, 2 years. So in novice, the first year, that's when they would kind of try to do real birth year stuff. So the first year, most of us were all my age, the 73 birth kids. We played together. And then at like my buddy Burke Murphy, he was the only one good enough to play a level up. So he played on the higher team. And then we all played together. And then when we went to the Rangers, so that it was a double A program at the time. Most first year kids would play on the single A team. Then you'd play on the double. And then they started doing double A for each birth year. And things really changed a lot, but it definitely all started at the Stingers of the Blackburn Hamlet Arena, which was also home for our lacrosse, which was another thing that was fun for me. Is I remember like riding my bike to lacrosse, which in hockey, as you know, people travel everywhere. So you don't really play local every game. And for us, having our own little rink, and it was right there. And I think probably 90% of our games are at the Blackburn Arena or maybe Earl Armstrong, but it's definitely walkable, which was fun.
Yeah, and if we weren't playing hockey or practicing at the arena in Blackburn, we were public skating there on the weekends, and fine tuning our skating skills, and to the sounds of Journey and all the other bands I used to play on that PA system.
It was, and even in the summer, sometimes I remember going there and they had roller skating a few times. Yeah, we did it. We actually did it. It was a school trip that we did, believe it or not, there when they'd melted the ice, and maybe they only did a couple of summers. And I thought it was kind of funny because in Canada, we didn't really grow up with too many roller rinks.
No, we didn't. So you played for the Blackburn Stingers, and then you played for the Gloucester Rangers, and then did you play summer hockey with, what is it, the Ottawa Capitals? Was that
Ottawa Capitals? Yeah, I only played a couple years because I think lacrosse was more my thing. I really enjoyed lacrosse, and the tough part about the spring program is you traveled a little more, because basically they try to take all the top kids from Ottawa. So then if you played in a tournament, it was always against, let's say, the top kids from Sudbury, from Toronto, somewhere else. So there was more travel involved. Mm-hmm. And as you know, summers in Ottawa, like kids didn't play a ton of sports anymore. It's almost like hockey was over, lacrosse was ending, maybe soccer was a little bit there. And little bit of baseball, but they weren't too prevalent back then. So actually, Mike, my brother, and myself, we'd go to Nova Scotia to my grandparents' house for at least a month every summer. So that's kind of put a little hitch in the spring travel hockey.
Right. And so, and then what's the next step? Then you're playing for the Nepean Raiders.
Yep. So the coolest thing I thought at the time, and I still think it's great, is for the Ottawa community is they almost have their own draft for juniors. You know, it used to be called the CJHL, Central Junior Hockey League. Now it's called the CCHL. And, you know, all the kids that I played with at Gloucester, we pretty much all got drafted these teams. And it was the first time that we kind of had to, I'm not going to say move away, but, you know, I got drafted by Nepean, which is probably only 20 minutes away. And I thought it was like, you know, moving to Western Canada. I couldn't believe how far I had to drive every day for practice instead of it being in my backyard. Yeah, so I played 2 years there, and same thing. A couple of my buddies were still on my team. Burke Murphy again, like he got drafted. We both got drafted in Nepean, and then my other buddies who were on Gloucester, a bunch of them played for the Rangers. A couple of them played for the Ottawa Junior Senators. A couple of them played for Canada. Like we just all dispersed at that. You know, we were 16 when that happened.
Yeah, thinking of that, the being that age, and I knew a bunch of guys who, you know, people used to talk about. This guy's a really good player. He's got a shot. Maybe he's going to play in the OHL. He's going to do this. Yep. He's going to do that. I had some friends too that played pro soccer also back in the day. But the one thing that separated a lot of those guys was the discipline factor, whether or not they could stick to the program and not be out partying all the time. And that, like, I mean, I think that's where, you know, there's lots of people who have talent, but they don't necessarily have the discipline that you would have had, or a lot of other players that, you know, had to make it and to go all the way. Yeah. So I remember looking back on some of those players, and you could see early on that guy's probably not going to make it.
Yeah, there were some real quality players in our area that still played at a high level, but didn't last very long. And it obviously was pretty common back then. You know, I totally credit. So my mother passed away when I was really young, and if my dad had to travel with Mike, my brother, for his tournaments, a lot of times I would just stay with other hockey parents, and vice versa. And we both, myself and brother and my dad, of course, credit a lot of our upbringing to not only my dad doing an outstanding job, but a lot of the parents that we surrounded ourselves with. And I was lucky because I'm still really good friends with most of my teammates from those years and their parents. And credit to them as well, being in the groups that we were and the upbringing we had. Yes, we like to go out, we like to have fun, but we would always find a way to get the workouts in. We would always find a way to show up on time. We just, you know, when you're in an environment like that, and it was a competitive environment, it really helped to have, you know, those other players that were of like minds and attitudes. And some of the other birth years and or teams that we knew didn't probably have that big of a core of kids like that. And I'm not saying some of them were probably better hockey players than I was, for sure. And I was just lucky enough to be kind of on the right path and, you know, get put back on that path sometimes by some of my best friends.
Yeah. And you were talking about your dad. Your dad was a huge part of that. You're saying your mom passed away when you were pretty young. You know, it's interesting, the stuff you remember. I remember that period very well. And I remember having a conversation with your dad. Might have been a Saturday afternoon or something. What year was it your mom passed away?
So we moved back in 1980 to Blackburn because we both, myself and Mike, were born in Ottawa at the time. We lived in Beacon Hill, and then my dad was in the Air Force. So we moved around. We went to Florida, then Northern Alberta and Cold Lake, Alberta, and then came back in 80, and she passed away the summer of 81. So we'd only been there for a year when she passed away. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember it was probably like a Saturday or Sunday, and we were playing out in the street, and I think we went into your place to grab something else. Maybe it was to grab another lacrosse stick or ball or something, and we were kind of running around the house looking for something, making a lot of noise. And your dad came into the living room and said, "You're making a lot of noise, and Adrian and Mike's mom is upstairs, and she's not feeling well, and it's too much noise. So I appreciate it if you keep your voices down or take it back outside." So we ended up going outside. And I remember at the time thinking, well, that seemed like a pretty serious conversation. His mom doesn't have the flu or something. And we went outside, and you or Mike told us what was going on, and that your mom was pretty ill at the time. And I remember later that year she passed away, and I remember thinking that was kind of the first time I ever thought, oh, you know, you can lose a parent. Yeah. You know, I knew the grandparents passed on, but it was shocking to know somebody who had lost their parent that must change who you are. I mean, but you're pretty young at the time.
Yeah, I talk about this quite a bit with my wife because it obviously has a lot to do defining who I am now. But I guess I wouldn't say I argue the fact, but I kind of refer to the fact that I was so young and my dad did such a good job. And we are not a super religious family, but a lot of it was based around, being Roman Catholic and with God and, angels and everything and taking sometimes needing the good people. So it was in a way normal for me because I didn't know any better. It was part of my life. And um, I said it was such I guess, a good experience in a way for me looking back because I knew a lot about my mom and I remember everything good about my mom. And maybe I was so young that I wasn't as devastated, even though it's a devastating event. I was just, I didn't understand what was happening, quite frankly. So,
hmm
and then, like I said, with the support cast we had, it was something that I remembered as being, you know, not being the most horrible incident of my life, even though it was,
Yeah.
because the way like I said, my dad and my brother, as you know, Mike, big guy, was basically my bodyguard because I would tend to get in trouble quite a bit, and he would clean up my messes all the time. So it was just, like I said, I'll talk about it with my wife Carolyn, and she'll be like, "That's not normal." And I said, "I know it's not normal, but it was the normal for me, so I didn't know any better. So it's kind of just how it went."
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. That's just the way
Yeah,
it was. It's
correct.
just, yeah. So your dad really picked up the mantle and moved forward. It's also a big part of being a hockey player and being able to move up the ranks. Also, is all about community, right? It takes a lot of other families to get involved, and imagine there's a lot of fundraisers that happen for tournaments and a lot of different things to raise money for kids to be able to progress in a game that's
Sure.
even back then was really expensive
Yeah,
compared to
yeah.
other
Well,
sports.
obviously hockey's time consuming, and I am very biased, of course, because of my hockey background and my hockey life and how much it's given back to me. And I will say hockey is such an amazing sport, such a family sport because, like we just kind of talked about lacrosse, and I love lacrosse. Truthfully, I probably liked lacrosse more than hockey when I was a kid. But lacrosse, I'd grab my stick, you'd put a helmet and shoulder pads, and you'd just bike down to the rink. Hockey, your parents have to drop you off. Normally, you get the 6 a.m. practices when you're young. It's, 30 below zero. They got to tie your skates. No hockey parent in those days would leave the rink. They would sit there and watch their kids practice. They'd be right back home. You'd probably have 10 kids over your house every day because there was a sleepover, and then be right back at it the Sunday morning. And then, Tuesday after school, you'd have to eat and get going, and they drive you back to the rink. And parents were so involved. And of course, it wasn't free, right? Equipment costs money. So you had to be a very blue collar, kind of middle class type of family. And, we've already kind of established that Blackburn, Hamilton, Ottawa was one of those communities. So it was just fitting that it was such a great place to grow up, especially for hockey players.
Yeah, and if you couldn't always afford to get brand new gear, you could go down to Glen Ogilvy School for the Blackburn Hamlet
Yeah,
Skate and Ski
yeah,
Exchange, right?
yeah. Well, I
You
even
could,
remember the first year I made the Rangers, so I guess I would have been maybe 10. I remember we went, and the Gloucester Rangers would have a similar thing. And my dad bought me a used jacket from some bigger kid who had already outgrown it. And remember, we'd get our patches, with our name and our position and number on it. So it was somebody else's jacket. We ripped off the old patch and had a new embroidered patch on. And I was like, at the time, it was obviously the coolest thing I'd ever gotten. And we didn't care if it was brand new or used. Life was a little simpler back then.
yeah, for sure. The one thing I remember was going down to Glen Ogilvy, was elementary school where they used to have this annual sale where you could go down there and sell your equipment. You could go and buy equipment. I bought a
Yeah.
pair of CCM Super Tax one year. And about a week later, I realized I had planter's warts from the skates I had bought.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was one of the few downsides of
You're like, oh
getting
boy.
secondhand equipment. So when is it this is probably the most asked question now I could say on this podcast. When is the moment when you realize that the skills that you have and the thing that you love to do most could be something that could sustain you as a career? When did you realize that?
Yeah, it's probably kind of a loaded question because I truly was probably never the best player on any team I ever played on. A bunch of those guys that I mentioned that I played youth hockey with were all better than me. They had more skill than me. They were just as determined, and I give my dad a lot of credit, especially because I've coached 4 of my 5 kids in hockey. I think and I used to get in trouble. Like I said, I'm not an angel. I wasn't an angel, but I only remember him getting mad at me one time in hockey, and
Hmm.
he wasn't even at the game. It was actually a spring tournament, and I remember trying to get up, and my leg slipped, and the ref thought I kicked the kid, and I got kicked out of the game, and I had to come home and tell my dad that I got suspended for the final game or whatever. And he was not happy, and I'm like, I didn't kick him. And at first, he didn't really believe me, because he's like, how can you basically get kicked out of the game for kicking when you don't kick someone? But the coaches were like, no, he actually didn't, and the coaches weren't happy about it. And it wasn't like I was the best player and they were losing me. It was more because I was so distraught. So the coaches were pretty, honest about it. Like, no, it wasn't his fault. But I guess I must have been a decent work ethic type player, because that's one of the things I'll get mad at my kids about, is their work ethic. And I don't remember my dad ever getting me about that. And I made a lot of mistakes. I had some bad games, but he never got angry with me. And I think that helped me throughout my career, because it's like I never had to worry about getting in the car or coming home or having my dad like basically break down my game and be like, you were awful. And it was pretty much a positive experience. That being said, so Bantam Major, we were 15 years old back then.
Hmm.
We ended up winning the Ontario Championship against like all the Toronto teams. We actually won it back in Pee Wee as well, but when you're 12, 13, I don't remember as much.
So is this the Rangers you're talking about? Is that
This
what
is
the
the
Rangers?
Rangers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
the Rangers. So when we were in Pee Wee, we won it up in Thunder Bay, and it was fun. And we weren't the best team. Like a couple Toronto teams were better than us. We just happened to win. But then fast forward to when we're 15 years old, I think we lost maybe 1 or 2 games all year, and we probably played close to 80 games. We were strong. Like we had goaltending, we had everything. And we had a coach named Rick Ladouceur, who was very strict. And there was no swearing in the locker room, which was tough for a kid like me, because I was, I like to swear. I guess I like to swear. I don't know. And he was hard on me. And he was the first coach, even though I loved my previous coaches and they were all great. He was the first one that would really, like, almost, I wouldn't say pick on me, but I think he knew that I had potential. So he was very overly strict with me, let's just say. And I kind of started to realize that year I really got better. I wasn't just middle of the pack anymore. And then as I was talking about that CJHL draft, I ended up getting drafted second overall, when there was probably, geez, I don't know, at least 6, 7 guys on that team that were probably better than me at the time. And I ended up getting drafted ahead of them, which was kind of a shock to everyone. And the coach GM from that Nepean team said he saw something in me. I remember he told me that. He goes, we knew that you were the guy. We watched you play, and it's like you didn't even know how good you were. And even that first year in Nepean, I was okay. I was 16 playing against 18, 19, 20-year-olds. So it was a bit of a challenge. But the next year, I was drafted by the Ottawa 67s. They wanted me to go play, and they were pushing really hard. And I just, the OHL back then was a pretty tough league. It was a heavy league. And like I said, I still wasn't a top kid. And I remember talking to my dad about it. And he's like, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I think it'd be like a dream come true to play for the 67s. I mean, that's what we knew, right? We didn't know anything about
Sure.
the US and colleges. Um, and at the time, a bunch of colleges were basically calling my agent. We had Larry Kelly, who's basically a famous Ottawa agent, who had pretty much every kid from Ottawa's family. I think they still own Kelly Funeral Homes. They're a well-established family in Ottawa. He was salt of the earth, still one of the nicest guys and a great friend. He's like, you probably have like 30 NCAA teams offering you a full scholarship, which truthfully, I didn't even know what that meant at the time, when I was 17 years old. And my dad was like, think of opportunities in life. Like, which one is going to give you more opportunity? And it was kind of like, well, the OHL, you go there, you can go to the NHL. And okay. And then what if you go down to the States of college? You could still play in the NHL. You could have a life experience. You could get jobs. You could move. You could see the world. Like, it was very interesting how that kind of happened. So that's when I started to realize, maybe this hockey thing is like, even though I already loved it, it was kind of like, holy crap, like this can actually get me somewhere and be good. And through that process, I was being scouted in the NHL, which was really cool. But even then, I didn't really understand the magnitude of it. Um, so I end up declining the Ottawa 67s. I end up playing another year of Tier 2 junior in Nepean. Um, I mean, I could give you the whole recruiting story, which is it's kind of a funny story, but it's a little bit long.
Sure, go for it.
Yeah, so you could basically do 5 recruiting trips. I think that was like NCAA rules, right?
Right.
5 certified or whatever you want to call them. So I remember I went to RPI, which is an engineering school, because my dad was in the military as an engineer, and uh, luckily I was very good at math. I got my dad's brains in the math department, so math and science came easy to me. So I'm like, I want to be an engineer. I went to RPI on a recruiting trip, and I had actually a couple of older buddies that were there, and they didn't love it,
Hmm.
which was kind of not a great sell for the school. They were just like, it's okay, it's whatever. So that was like, okay, I'm not sure about that. Then I went to Colgate University and I had a blast. I really liked it. Then I went to Vermont, which I loved. And at the time, I remember Aaron Miller, who played in the NHL for a while, was there. John LeClaire was playing for the team. The coaches were great. I just actually saw Roger Grillo the other day, who works for USA Hockey now, who was the assistant coach recruiting us. It was a great recruiting trip. They're like, you're going to be our guy. And the next year, Marty St. Louis came and Patrick Sharp came out. Like, we would have had one of the best teams ever.
Right.
But so then I had Cornell.
Hmm.
So I even liked Cornell probably even more, but Ivy Leagues don't give full scholarships. And my dad having a job basically would have had to pay some money. So it didn't seem right that if I could go for a full scholarship
Right.
to have my dad pay. So my 5th recruiting trip is Michigan. And my old teammate Aaron Ward was there, and he was so excited. And the assistant coach was excited. And the night before my flight to Michigan, Red Berenson, the famous coach, calls me and says, "We're super excited to have you. You'll be a great 7th defenseman for us next year." And I was on the phone and my face dropped and I kind of hung up. And my dad's like, "What's wrong?" I'm like, "I think he just said I was going to be their 7th defenseman." And it was kind of like these other schools were like, "Oh, you're going to be our power play guy. You're going to be our number 1 guy, our started, whatever, higher."
Yeah.
So I don't end up going on my 5th trip. I talked to my best buddy, one of my best buddies, Stevie Thornton, who had already committed to Boston University. Their coach calls me. He's like, "Come on down this weekend." They just happen to be playing in the Bean Pot, which is the biggest tournament in college, on a Monday night. We go to a Bruins game. I go to the Bean Pot. I fall in love with it. I end up going to BU. So now things are really rolling. We end up going to the draft down in Buffalo because in those days, if you're a first-year Canadian kid, you had to get drafted the first 3 rounds. I go to the draft with my buddy Steve Thornton. First 3 rounds get called. I don't get drafted. So it's kind of one of those, all right, well, that was a long way for nothing.
Hmm.
We didn't really know. I ended up going to college and getting drafted that summer. And that's when I'm like, okay. And even in college, I probably played as the 5th, 6th guy that year. So it wasn't like I was the best kid in college. And I was pretty much the only D-man from that team that kind of ended up moving on. It was just, I really think I kept improving at every stage, which you want kids to do all the time in
Sure.
business and life and everything. But I really did just keep getting better, where some of these kids, they peaked maybe a little earlier. And I don't know. I was lucky because everywhere I went, there was good coaches who helped me, not only as a player, but as a person. And somehow it really did work out for me.
Yeah, Mike, now correct me if I'm wrong. I was talking to Mike. He came down to Costa Rica just before the pandemic broke, and we had a chance to hang out and chat. And he was talking a bit about your hockey career, and he was saying that, like I said, correct me if I'm wrong, that when you went to Boston University, that there was a coach there who really kind of cemented in your brain that you could do this. This is something that was achievable for you.
Yeah, well, there were actually many coaches at different stages who did that.
Yeah.
If I could start with in Nepean, Jeff McLean, which was a crazy story. This guy, he was the GM, the coach, and the trainer, and he would tape our sticks before games too. Like he was guy.
He was
This
all
guy.
in.
Oh yeah. So he passed away, over a decade ago. God bless him. And he would bring kids. So remember, I played for the Gloucester Rangers youth hockey, and we kind of scattered and went and played for all these other teams. He got to meet us and know us really well, and he actually got to know our old teammates well who played for other teams. And he was such a proponent of college and expanding your life as opposed to getting pigeonholed in the OHL. And I'm not saying the OHL is bad, because it really is awesome. It's probably the best league. But he just wanted everyone to know there was more out there, where he would go and pick up some of my old teammates who are now playing against us and drive them down to Clarkson and St. Lawrence, these colleges, just so they could see how much fun it could be and how good the hockey was, which is unheard of. A coach and a GM from a team picking up kids from another team. And so this guy was very special. So he always had a lot of faith in me. And then in college, I had Jack Parker, who is, a Hall of Fame coach, who truthfully, I probably wasn't his favorite hockey player, because there was a lot of kids on the team better than me, but he would help me out like off the ice and with stuff, and just kind of realize like, you can go a lot further. And the assistant coach there was Blaise McDonald. And we had Dave Silk, who was a 1980 Olympian, and he was a ton of fun. And they would just like, I don't think you realize how good you could be. And they would kind of say that. And, truth be told, a lot of coaches say that to a lot of players, but I really felt like they meant it when they were talking to me about it, because it wasn't just like, okay, kid, come on, you got to be better. There's more here. So keep working at it.
Yeah.
There was a lot of steps in that.
Can you see a difference? Is there a difference in the type of hockey players that come out of like the OHL or the Western Hockey League compared to kids that are coming out of Ivy League schools or the university program?
Absolutely. If you fast forward through to my first year of college, and then I got invited to the World Junior Camp, which is, in Canada is the ultimate goal for that anybody under 20. If you can go to a World Juniors. And I ended up getting drafted by the Canucks in the 5th round. So 5th rounders do not get invited to the Canadian World Junior Camp. To this day, I'm not 100% sure why I got invited, unless you look at it on paper. And I believe, with the exception of Paul Correa, who is future Hall of Famer, I think I was the only college kid invited. So I'm pretty sure I was like a token invite, which God bless me, because I tell everybody, right place, right time matters, but you have to be ready when you're at that place at that time. And I remember that summer, I was so blessed to have gone to college where we worked out 5 days a week, because we only played on weekends. Like, college in the OHL is so different, because the OHL is a young pro where you play 75 games and you're on the road. College, we were home every night. We had one real long road trip. It was Maine, which was 6 hours away, and we actually flew. So every game was within 2 hours. We'd come home every night, and we'd train 5 days a week. So it was very good for a young 18-year-old to grow physically, specifically, right?
Yeah.
So I go to this World Junior Camp. Nobody knew who I was. And I trained all summer, which a lot of, not to discredit the OHL, because the best players still come out of the OHL, but a lot of these kids didn't really know how to work out. They really hadn't, they'd been off the ice all summer. So I came into that camp and probably played the best hockey of my life at that time. And I ended up showing so well that a man named Paul Henry, who's a legend in hockey, he's a psychologist, a sports psychologist, and he's worked with the Panther, he's worked with the Islanders, he's worked with a million hockey teams. He was the director of player personnel for the upcoming Olympic team. And at the time, it wasn't an Olympic year, but there was a Canadian national team full time. So, and what they would do is they would grab these kids, some college kids, some pro kids, and say, hey, let's go play a tournament in Europe. But they would have a full-time team. So in the middle of this World Junior Camp, he said, would you like to, maybe come play a few tournaments? I'm like, absolutely. Play for the Canadian national team? Are you kidding? This is like it's unbelievable. Yeah. By the end of the World Junior Camp, he goes, we'd like to offer you a contract to play full-time for the Canadian national team, the men's national team. And I said, well, I got a full scholarship down to Boston. And he goes, craziest thing, because it's still considered amateur, you don't lose your eligibility to get a scholarship. So if you come here for a year, it doesn't work out, you can go back to BU, and you're still good. Like, it's paid for and everything. So kind of a no-brainer. We kind of left BU in a bind because it was at the end of August, so they didn't have time to recruit anyone else. So there was a little bit of a tension there. But Paul Henry the whole time is, to this day, probably, with my family aside, probably my biggest fan. And he was one of those guys who was always like, you're going to be a stud in the NHL. I thought he was crazy. I'm like, I would just like to play in the NHL, but he's like, you're going to be a good player. You're going to be awesome. You're going to go to the Olympics. And there was no guarantee that I'd go to the Olympics, because it was the next year. And pretty much everything he said that was going to happen kind of happened. And so I left college after 1 year. ended up playing the Olympics and then signed pro. Sorry, going back to your question about the OHL players versus college players. So
Mhm.
that was my World Junior experience. So I go to the World Juniors. We were in Sweden, and now I was the only college kid besides Paul Correa who actually, yeah, he was playing college that year. He was in like still in junior hockey at the time back in British Columbia. And just talking about life experiences, these guys, like a great, awesome day was like going from, Sudbury back to Ottawa on the bus and maybe, drinking a case of beer. Like that was, oh, and I'm like, in college, like we don't live with a billet family. As long as we show up on time, we got restaurants we can go to or the dining
Right.
hall. You meet like, yeah, BU, I think we had like 20,000 undergrads. You meet new people every day. We go to a Red Sox game, we're watching the Boston Marathon. We got people who live in the Cape. You'd go to their house and we meet people from Boston College, from Harvard, and they're like, they were like, their jaws dropped. I'm like, it's such a more mature living experience.
Sure.
And it's not better, not worse, hockey wise, a lot of people would argue the OHL is better hockey if you want to go to the NHL, but it helped me mature a lot because you're really doing it on your own. And it's now you're seeing it. If you start looking at the analytics from the NHL, these college kids the percentages are getting higher and higher of them who make the NHL, and a little later, a little older, right? Because the OHL, you're done at 20. So now some of these rookies are all like 22, 23, 24 years old, and they're coming through college. So it was a great experience for me.
Yeah, it'd be a big difference having that experience living in Boston and spending a bunch of years in Peterborough. I mean,
Yeah.
that would be a great experience too, but a very different
Yep,
experience
different,
and more limiting in terms of what you're going to learn in the greater scheme of things and not just hockey.
Yeah, no, I agree. It was amazing. And, I think most hockey players are pretty versatile. Like I said, most of us come up from good families and everything, and we have good values. And it really just opened up I'll never forget. So I went there with Stevie Thornton, and we were walking, down Com Ave, which BU is a city campus. And we literally would bump into parking meters because we had our eyes up in the air looking at these tall buildings and looking at students everywhere. We were in awe for the first week and a half. And I don't think, junior hockey in Canada, you will get necessarily that aspect of it. You will get the hockey, and even my son was drafted by Sudbury, and the coaches and GMs were great, and I still keep in touch with them. And I would have had no problem with him playing there. But like I said, with my dad way back in 1989 was like, opportunity. What is going to give you more opportunity in life? Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? And it kind of resonated with me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. It's funny you mentioned Sudbury. I used to go up there a lot in the summer. My grandparents lived just outside of Sudbury in a place called Coniston.
Yeah.
And my grandfather worked at the smelter in Sudbury.
Yeah.
And when we used to go back there in the summer, there were all kinds of NHL players and OHL players who played on the softball league there. That we go down to the softball the park and watch these guys who played in, Randy Boyd, who played for I guess he played for the Penguins back in the day, and there was a bunch of other guys, but that played pro hockey who did that in the summer. It was amazing.
Yeah, Sudbury is, and even with my son being drafted there, I feel like I know more people in Sudbury than I do obviously in Ottawa. I know a lot of people, but Sudbury is one of those towns because of the hockey community. It's really an amazing small town. Like, you know what I mean? Of course, they got the nickel mines and they're known for being hard ass, and they work hard, they play hard, but and that's, Northern Ontario. It's special, and I being from Canada, obviously it's something that we're accustomed to.
Yeah. Well, Stompin' Tom wasn't wrong when he talks about, Sudbury Saturday night.
Yeah.
It's a rough and tumble town.
Yeah. They like hockey, drink, and fight. They're good at all three.
Exactly. So you get drafted in 92 by the Canucks. What do you remember about that moment?
So, so I go back the prior year, the draft was in Buffalo. We drive down there, don't get drafted, which wasn't the end of the world. I mean, like I said, this was, even me being considered to be drafted was amazing. Because as we know, even for a lot of the non-hockey players growing up in Blackburn Hamlet, being, NHL and everything's a dream. So we go to Montreal, and I remember I went with two of my buddies, Paul Rushforth, who's now a big real estate mogul in Ottawa, and Matthew Barnaby, who played, for hundreds of games with Buffalo, and I played with him in Chicago, Tampa, Pittsburgh, Dallas. He's played a bunch, one of the most colorful guys I've ever met, obviously. So we kind of all go to the draft together, and it was in the Montreal Forum. And I was sitting with my dad, and he had a couple friends there. And for some reason, we made a pact because I kind of told him how it was last year, and we knew some horror stories because back then the draft was like 12 or 15 rounds, and people would sit there for like 9 hours waiting for. And it's pretty anxious too. Like it's not easy sitting there every time they announce someone. You're hoping it's your name. So we made a pact that we would stay for 5 rounds, just because it would be too agonizing to
It's torture.
Yeah. So we're halfway through the 5th round, and I think Matthew Barnaby got drafted. Maybe he got drafted in the 4th, and he got drafted basically right around there.
Mm-hmm.
He had met with Buffalo again, and he comes up to me. He's like, "What do you think? Like, what do you want to do?" And I'm like, "Okay, well, there's only like 3 picks left in the 5th." So I remember telling my dad, I said, I'm leaving. We're going to go hang out. Of course, we're 18 at the time, so we were legal in Montreal. So we're going to go sit at a pub and wait to see what happens. Something, I don't know. I'm walking out of the building, and Vancouver calls my name. I remember running back in, looking at my dad. And even though I told my dad that I was leaving, he looks next to him to kind of like hug me or shake my hand. And he didn't even realize I wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm waving to him. I'm basically, instead of going to see Vancouver, I'm going up to see my dad. And I believe it was, oh my God, why am I? It's not Steve Penny. It was, I'll think of his name, who worked for Vancouver time, grabs my arm and was like, "Hey, Adrian, come on. We got to go meet Pat Quinn and the coaches and all this." So I basically went to the table, met them all, did like a little quick interview and stuff. And it was exciting. I mean, it was, and it's funny because I think most kids dream of playing in the NHL. And now everybody knows everything with the draft, with social media. Like, we didn't think of the draft when we were kids. Like, we didn't think of getting on a podium and we were basically Stanley Cup playing hockey. So that draft experience at the time in my life was the biggest thing that ever happened. Obviously, it was like, oh my God. I remember even when I went to that World Junior camp after, and they're like, "Okay, what was the best of your life?" And I'm like, getting drafted was the best day. And all these other kids were like, "Yeah, being drafted 1st overall, 2nd overall, winning the Memorial Cup, all this." And I'm like, "Well, I get drafted 5th round, but 117th overall." And I still thought it was pretty cool. So it was a really, really cool experience.
And so you get drafted in 92 and then you start playing in 94. Is that right?
So that was the same summer, go to the World Juniors, end up showing well, play on the national team. I end up going to the World Junior tournament, 93. We end up winning gold. That was the year when Manny Legacy stopped like 60 shots a game. We were, I think, ranked going 6th going in. For some reason, they didn't think we were going to be that good. And we ended up killing every team. Sweden, who had Naslund, Forsberg, like they were by far the best team. They beat us 8-0 and I think 7-1 in exhibition games. We ended up beating them. And back then it was a round robin only. So there was no quarter, semis, or finals.
Right.
So we ended up having the best record. So we won the World Juniors, which was amazing.
Amazing, yeah.
And then the following year was the Olympic year where we lost in a shootout to Sweden. So I got a silver medal. That was in Lillehammer, and that was an unreal experience. So basically for those 2 years on the national team and Olympic team, I traveled the world. We'd go play in tournaments in Sweden, Russia, Germany, Czech Republic, Finland, Austria, any basically where there was high level hockey. We would go spend a couple of weeks there, come back and train, and then go back. So as a 19, 20-year-old, it was, I didn't realize how awesome it was at the time, even though I loved it. I looked back and it was such a worldly amazing experience. It truly was, once in a lifetime.
And I'm guessing that, and that's perfect for the Canucks, right? Because until they can find a sort of a spot for it where you fit on the team, you're playing with, the elite players of your age group, and you're developing faster than you could in any other sort of situation where you're playing and waiting to play, right? Because otherwise, what the all other players are playing, they jump in right away with the farm team.
Or I probably still would have been in college, because if I wouldn't have left to go there, and not that it would have necessarily worked out differently, but like I said, being a 5th round pick, if I would have played 4 years at Boston University, it would have been a bigger challenge than playing on the men's national team, playing against, I played against like Peter Stastny. I was playing against some of these players who already retired from the NHL that were going to the Olympics.
Sure.
These future Hall of Famers, Matt Naslund, like these guys, that's who we played against.
Yeah.
So it was definitely good for my development. So then the 94 Olympics are over, end of February. Go back to Ottawa, skate for a couple weeks, and then my agent in Vancouver kind of put their heads together, and I ended up signing a contract. And I never went right to Vancouver. Back then, our farm team was in Hamilton, so the Hamilton Canucks. Played the end of the year there, and I thought it was great. You know, pro hockey, it was like still eye opening. And then next year was a lockout year. So I didn't even go to Vancouver's camp again. We went right to Syracuse. Hamilton and franchise and moved to Syracuse. So I played for a year in Syracuse. And then at the end of that year, I ended up getting called up to Vancouver, and I played my first game without ever actually meeting anyone from Vancouver because I'd never been to a training camp or anything. Played in the last game of the season. Then I ended up playing in game 7 of the first round because someone got injured. And then I ended up basically starting in the minors next year. And then from then on, it was NHL. So I've basically played at every level almost possible on my way up, which
Yeah.
I think had a lot to do with me trying to get better all the time. You know?
Yeah. That's pretty amazing when you get to play with, like you said, with players of that caliber, and you're still, kind of, for lack of a better way of putting it, you're still kind of a child,
Yeah.
you're 17 years old, and you're playing with, like you said, Mats Naslund, and some of these people are future Hall of Famers. That must have been such an incredible situation to be playing with those players.
I think, like I said, a little different nowadays because everybody knows everybody. When you get a rookie in nowadays, he already, like here in Chicago. So a rookie comes up, he almost feels like he already knows Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews, right? Because they've watched them and they do so much. And there's, now even all these pros will go work out together, skate together. Back then, nobody really did anything like that. So it was, for me watching, CBC Hockey Night in Canada and seeing these guys, the next thing you know, I'm on the ice playing against them. I'm like, oh my God, like the Stastny brothers, like those guys were, the best Nordiques to ever play the game. And Mats Naslund, like he was one of the first Swedish guys to come over in Montreal. So these guys were, I wouldn't say they were my idols growing up. It was more of a Guy Lafleur, Larry Robinson, but these were the guys that I definitely were in awe of.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned Guy Lafleur. He was my favorite hockey player growing up, and he had played in Cumberland just up the road from us.
Yeah. Well, he grew up, he's from Thurso.
Yeah.
Where the pulp mill was, where you drive by and have to plug in one. Like Cornwall too. Plug your nose driving by, but
it was pretty stinky.
Towns.
Yeah, I actually, it's funny. I once wore Guy Lafleur's one of his Stanley Cup rings. I worked at a hotel in Ottawa, and there was a guy who, I remember NTN Sports. You go in and play the game players in the bar, and you could play like NFL or whatever or trivia. And he was also Guy's manager, and Guy had given him one of his rings. So he came in one day, and I was talking to him about how big a fan I was of Guy's. He goes, "You want to try his NHL ring on? his Stanley Cup ring on?"
Those old guys are the best. They really are. You know what? I know times have changed with everything in life, but those old guys were just regular dudes that you'd see at the pub after the game, and they're still the salt. When we do alumni stuff, the older alumni guys are just the absolute best.
Yeah, and guys like Guy, he smoked a couple packs a day while he was playing. I can only imagine what he would be like if he didn't smoke and train the way hockey players these days train.
Yeah.
But then again, it was a level playing field.
Yeah, it absolutely was. Nobody worked out. Nobody skated in the summers. It was just show up for training camp because it's actually training camp.
Yeah, this is actually something I was going to bring up with you. I remember you'd hear stories about, like even a Mario Lemieux would come back from a summer at the cottage with a beer gut that he'd have to work off during, the training camp. And I get a sense that maybe when you came into the league, it was sort of the tail end of that era. And then really, within a few years, you're part of that whole crew that's just working out. Like, you're working out all summer towards the end of your career or mid. What's that like?
Summer was harder than basically the season. Like if you didn't, at the end of my career, if you didn't train as hard as you could in the summer, unless you were like a top guy, you wouldn't be on the team. Like they used your summer training. Basically, I'm not going to say they'd hold it against you, but it was definitely a tool for them come training camp with all the testing. If there was like 5 guys vying for 3 spots, the kids who were in better shape were making the team. It was always, it was definitely a massive tool. And, when I started, once again, one of the benefits of going to college was teaching me how to train because a lot of these teams, even at the pro level, didn't train. So I was on a training regiment. So when I would come to camp early on in Vancouver, they're like, this kid is like man, he's working. And it was just part of what we did already. And some of these older guys who were awesome players and awesome guys, it would take them that month of training camp to really get up to speed, where some of us younger guys would come in, we would almost be at our peak then. So you actually
Yeah.
had to learn how to, over the course of my career, to, ramp up all season long and train during the season. Like when I remember playing in Calgary, so Jerome McGinley was a good buddy of mine, a good teammate. We would lift after almost every game. Like we would work out after games all the time. And back then people didn't really do it. And they're like, are you crazy? I'm like, well, if you need a day to recover, you can't work out on your day off because then you're tired the next day.
Yeah.
And we would get a lot of workouts in, and it would just, and over the course of the year, you would still be in good shape and you would maintain your weight, where some guys would lose weight. Some guys would actually gain weight because they'd stop working out and eating like crap on the road. And it was, hockey was almost archaic compared to some other sports when I joined. And now it's come a long way. And I mean, if you watch it now, it doesn't matter if you're watching the NHL and the minor leagues or college or the OHL, it is obnoxiously fast. It is crazy how good these kids are now. It's amazing.
When does that mind shift happen for, when it becomes a 12 months a year, hockey is all the time, never stops sort of thing?
I would say it was probably late 90s.
Yeah.
I think the most impactful player in the history of the NHL for that reason is Sidney Crosby.
Yeah.
Because he was the first superstar who was the best conditioned athlete on his team. And it was almost like, if he's going to do it, how can the guy who plays fourth line, how can the guy who is hoping to make it not put in the work? And Crosby proved it over and over with conditioning and everything that he could be. And he, obviously skill-wise, mental-wise, everything-wise, he was one of the top guys, if not the best. But he truly made it so everyone in the league was like, oh my God, if Crosby's doing, like, we got to do it. Not to say I didn't work out with some other top players who did it, but I think, when he came in at 2005, it was and there was a lockout prior. The game really changed because all of a sudden you weren't allowed to hook, you weren't allowed to hold. They changed the rules.
Right.
And it was him in that era. And then Ovechkin was part of it too. I don't know if he's as big of a workout guy as Crosby, but it changed the game where it went faster, fitness mattered, and it was the off ice became a massive issue.
And then for him as well, he comes along at a time when enforcers are not playing the same.
Correct.
They're going away. So all of a sudden he's an open target.
Hit. He has to deal with it. Whereas, I still say Gretzky, no one will touch Gretzky's records. But he played with some pretty good players. But here's the other thing. So, I'll have this argument with people like, oh, look at the goaltending back in the 70s and 80s. That's why these guys could all score. But I'm like, yeah, but you weren't allowed to, you can't two-hand guys anymore. You can't hook. You can't grapple guys. Gretzky, Mario, yes, they weren't getting run like maybe a Crosby would, but there would be guys holding on to them, jumping on them, hooking them, sticking them, trying to take liberties as much as they could. Whereas now that's like half of those penalties are even suspension. So these guys had to play a way tougher game, not as fast, not as overly skilled as, the group, but they had to deal with stuff that these young guys don't have to deal with now. Like you had guys that just wanted to murder you on the ice back then.
Yeah. Yes. Crosby never had the benefit of having a Semenko on his team.
No, God, no. He did play with some tough guys, but there was no Dave Semenko.
Yeah, and then his former teammate Jaromir Jagr, he's no slouch when it comes to training. That guy's a tireless workhorse. He's still playing, right, in Europe.
He truly is married to the game. I don't think he was ever married, and that's why I say that. I remember when he was a rookie, his mom moved with him just so he would eat properly. You've probably heard all the stories how he would have keys to the rink, and at like midnight he'd be bored, he'd go over and work on some skills and do some squats and be strong. And he was obviously a power forward who was so skilled and could still skate. He really was. He had everything about him. You could try to take his knees out and you would injure yourself trying to take his knees out. Like he was just stronger. So he's, I believe, maybe 2 years older than me. So he's probably just turned 50, or maybe he's 1 year older than me. And he's still like a point a game playing in the top league in Czech Republic. Like it's insane.
But you played 19 seasons, correct?
Yeah, well, there's lockouts, so it's 18, 17, 18, 19. I don't even know what the
Okay,
number
but
is.
you play for the span of 19
Yep.
seasons, which is just about unheard of, right? Not many
Yeah, it's not
players
very
play
common.
that long.
Yeah, I was lucky, very lucky.
I was wondering what the average length of an NHL career was. So I Googled it yesterday and that I was surprised by the number, but the number that I saw was 5 years. Does that sound about right?
So there's different ways of looking at it. If you take everyone who's ever played an NHL game, I think it's probably even shorter than that because it takes, the account the kid who came up for one shift and all this, whatever.
Right.
Um, if you take the guys who have played, let's say, over a full season, maybe 100 games, then all of a sudden it starts, the average might get up to like 600 games or 500. It really gets skewed once you get, because if you're established, and sadly the NHL is changing, but it used to be like that. If you make it and you're set, you probably can stick around for at least a good 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
But even 10 is a long time. But even when I started playing, like, so my four mentors when I started playing were Dave Babich, Jyrke Lume, Dana Merz, and Brett Hedican. Brett Hedican was only 3 years older than me, and he was a fitness freak. He's from Minnesota, went to St. Cloud, and he taught me as much about the game as anybody else because it was about eating right, staying conditioned, getting sleep, and we would still go out, but he'd be like, you need your hours of sleep. You need to stay off your feet. You need to be rested for games. He was so professional that way. Dave Babich, who I believe was only 33 at the time, I thought he was 93. Like he, had a mustache and he was already balding and he looked like a 90-year-old man to me, but he still played for a bunch of years. And Dana Merzen was only 29 and I thought he was almost retired. Back then, you were happy if you made it to the 30s.
Mm-hmm.
And then now, because everybody's in such good shape, let's go back a few years. At the end of my career, a lot of players could play to their late 30s because they were better conditioned and we knew all about nutrition and everything, and travel was easier on our private jets when we fly. Now it's almost going backwards again because there's so many good players that they're really not keeping the old guys around as much anymore. So it's hard to play. Obviously you got the Marlows and these guys who have set records, but they're anomalies now because a lot of these guys, even though they're still effective at, 33, 34, we're going to get this 19, 20-year-old who has more upside and who's probably a little faster. So the game is kind of goes in cycles.
Right. So you're saying probably some of the reasons you just mentioned why you had nice long careers has to do with the fact that you got mentored by people at a young age to,
Yep.
about health and nutrition and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, you like all players, you've had, injuries. You suffered injuries. You didn't get any knockout knee injuries that ended your career, that sort of thing. So a lot of that's luck too.
A little bit,
Yeah.
I think so it's funny. Adam Oates now is like the skills or specialty coach for a lot of these NHL superstars now. And his big philosophy for what he teaches these kids is all about awareness. And most of it comes from injury prevention because he's like, if you have more skill, you're probably going to fumble the puck less, which means you're going to have your head up more, which means you're going to see players coming, and it's all about having your head up and doing smart plays. So not that I'm giving myself a credit because I was not the most skilled player, but I had a decent awareness, and a lot of it is genetics. Some guys have stronger knees, some guys, can be more injury prone. I have had my fair of injuries, knock on wood, none that were, I had my shoulder rebuilt. I've torn MCL, but didn't really have to miss time. The two most nagging ones, I had high ankle sprains, which last a long time. Those are kind of fluky.
Mm-hmm.
But I've had groin tears, which plagued me since my first team in Vancouver. It's just back then we didn't know that we really had to, stretch as much. We were all about getting stronger, and we didn't realize that you had to do more. And even the first time I tore my groin, I was like, okay, just throw some ice on it, let it scar up so it can really like be stronger. And now it's all that scarring tissue that keeps re-tearing all the time. So it became like a nagging injury. But I think me personally, one of the reasons why I could play longer is I played on teams that allowed me to play the way I played. Like certain coaches, they were like, okay, you don't have to be the guy who skates around 100 miles per hour and hits everybody. Just be the steady guy, be the voice in the locker room, be a mature player, and teams still do need that aspect of it. So it kind of worked for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, even I work out with a trainer down here in Costa Rica, and he's often referring to, exercises or that are, he refers to them as that have gone to the iron graveyard, just all kinds of things that we used to do in the gym that we don't do anymore because it's horrible for joints and shoulders and all that kind of stuff that we figured out over the years. But a lot of that stuff you probably started out doing that now you would never do in a gym, probably, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Well, so when I went to BU, our strength coach was Mike Boyle, who is arguably one of the best strength coaches even in this era. And of course, like everything else, it evolves. When I went to BU, we were power cleans, power squats, power bench, deadlift, leg press, like everything was just heavy as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's gone to all functional, right? Everything you could still do heavy, but it has to be your total body. It has to be core. My last few years in Arizona, I worked at this place called Athletes Performance, which is now I think called Exos. They were all about health and all about how are we going to maintain your body so there's no injuries, because I don't care how much you can lift, how fast you can skate, how hard you can shoot the puck. If you're injured, it's worthless. So we are fully like injury prevention while getting better.
Right.
So that was something that extended my career as well.
Do hockey players do yoga, Pilates, any of that kind of stuff?
A little bit. So that kind of goes both ways, because hockey players are kind of more of like a sprinter football player type where you need that pop, that fast twitch muscle.
Yeah.
So some people will be like, you can stretch, you can do this other stuff, but you don't want to do the long, slow, like going for a long jog. Sometimes people, the way yoga is, don't agree with it. But yeah, so if you it's almost like you can't do all of one thing. You just need to almost do a little bit of everything. Obviously, there are more specific hockey things that you can do, but you really just, the yoga principles and the Pilates principles of having the strong core and flexibility and worrying about your spine helps every athlete for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Wanted to ask you about as well. Remember seeing a documentary a bunch of years ago, HBO Sports documentary, primarily about NFL players, who had just had nightmarish experiences with, making a lot of money and getting swindled or losing that money and not being, trained to deal with, making money all of a sudden. When you're going to college, when you're getting into the hockey world at a pro level, do the teams have anybody that comes to you that talks about planning for retirement, managing your money, dealing with, there's also the other aspect too of you're out there in the world, you're now famous, you're in many places, you're a big celebrity depending on where you play, going out, meeting women, about being careful about who you engage with. Is there training for that kind of stuff?
Absolutely. So maybe on the team level now there is, not when I played, but the NHLPA was on that.
Yeah.
So every year, and we'd have union meetings, and then they would basically branch off, and you'd have these district, it was ex-players that would basically take care of either the division or something, have a few teams, and they'd come and meet with you. And so we had our NHLPA doctors, and we would have these meetings, and it would be like 1 year, it would be about, drugs, and it would be the new drugs on the market. Another year it would be like spousal abuse. And not to say it was like 1 year, this is the only thing we're worrying about, but they would basically say, okay, you guys we've talked about with the older guys with this. So this year, here's our big focus. And it was also things that were happening, current events, right? Always money is always a big thing, especially nowadays, like not so much in my era, but now because it's easy to be hacked and all this other stuff. And social media is a big one now.
Sure.
And now agents are getting more involved. I was lucky when I came up when we didn't have to deal with any of this stuff. Like there was no phones, there was no social media, there was no like, I always tell everybody, I came up in the best era because I came up with the guys who like to go to a pub after games and drink beer. And at the end of my career, I came up where guys made money. So I kind of get a little bit of the both. There was like the best team camaraderie. And then you could actually do well enough in hockey that, when you retired, you could still work, but you weren't like, looking for a job the next day. And so it led to a lot of people having a better retirement. But we all know that there's lots of things that can go wrong with that as well. And I go back to my first statement about Blackburn Hamlet being such a great place to grow up. Most hockey players are brought up by pretty good, loving families. Like you have to be dedicated. Your parents have to be pretty much all in to help you as a hockey player if you want to get to that level. So a high percentage of hockey players are pretty level-headed, and I know there's still guys who will screw up. There's mental issues. There's lots of issues that could come into play. And a lot of it could be because of injury. It could have just be personalities and whatever. So, but there's a lot more talk, especially with all the stuff that's gone on in the world in recent history, that it has become definitely some key talking points now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a whole different, to mix metaphors. It's a whole different ball game now.
Yeah.
I mean, back then you can go out on a Saturday night, you can have a little too much to drink with other players and make some kind of faux pas, and you can learn from it and move on, and these days, unfortunately, you make that mistake and you get caught on camera and you can get canceled these days.
Oh, absolutely.
That didn't happen back in the day. So that was kind of a nice thing. There was more space from you to learn from your mistakes.
Correct. Well, even the first experience we were out and we had one of the younger guys. We just went, it was like like a brew pub, nothing crazy. It was a day off and we're on the road. And one of the younger guys was with us. And, he had a couple drinks, nothing crazy, but us older guys had a bunch of drinks. And we actually took a picture of the young rookie with, let's say, 20 empties in front of him, right? Just kind of joking.
Yeah.
And somehow, this is right when like social media was starting. It was even before social media. Somehow it got emailed to our GM, and the fact that it was emailed from someone outside of the club, and so we had a meeting about it. We're like, guys, you can't like take pictures of what are you thinking? And it was like, oh, we were just kind of joking around ourselves, kind of. And he's like, this is how easy it is. And of course, now everybody knows about a picture stays forever and whatever you type and stuff. But back then, it wasn't even that bad, but it's just like, this kid could get in trouble for this, he's underage, and it was lesson learned. Like I said, it was more of a slap on the wrist than anything, but yeah, we would, life was a little easier back then. And it wasn't just about getting in trouble. It was just, with your own family, with your kid, you had more space, and it was pretty simple. And I've, obviously playing in Vancouver, I came up right after they lost to the Rangers in '94. So there was like almost celebrity status. And then at the other end of the spectrum, I played in Arizona, where basically everybody knew who Shane Doan was, and they couldn't name maybe one or two other hockey players on the team.
Sure.
So it was kind of a great place to play for a family and doing other things, because you never really had to, and not that you get bothered by it, but you definitely could pick and choose what you wanted to do.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Arizona and playing for different teams and the level of exposure you have in different towns. You got an opportunity to play for 7 different NHL teams. I guess the longest stretch was with Vancouver, who originally drafted you. Yep. So you get that experience of settling down in a town, and you're still pretty young then. But I guess when did you get married? Well, was it before
1998? So I was still in Vancouver. So okay. Yeah, I actually married Carolyn, my high school sweetheart. So we dated the year before I left to go to college. And then we had a couple breakups in between because of long distance relationship. And back then, no cell phones, no nothing. I mean, we even tell our kids nowadays, like sometimes we'd go like a week and a half without calling each other. It was like, I'd be in Europe playing for the national team. We'd be calling cards. It was kind of, so, and then we got back together probably a year after college. And then we've been together ever since. So it's, I think for me, and I tell everybody this, marriage, kids, works. Like, it is great. It's the best thing that ever happened to me. It actually helped me focus more on hockey, if that makes sense. It just, even after a horrible game, because I've had plenty of those, I'd come home and I'd have my babies waiting for me and they were happy and it was great. And my wife didn't care if I played like crap. So there was like unbelievable benefits.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Oh, so you met your wife at Louis Riel?
She went to Colonel By.
Oh, Colonel By.
She went to Colonel By. Yeah, she was a Beacon Hill girl. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Because we'd gone. You and I went to for people who are listening don't know. You and I went through the French school system, French Catholic school system. We went to École Sainte Marie in Blackburn, and then Pauline Vanier, which was the junior high school, and then Louis Riel. I only went to Louis Riel for 1 year for grade 9, and then I went to Pearson. So I think that's where I kind of lost track. I didn't see you and Mike for a while after that because I was at a different school.
Well, and we moved to Orleans right then.
Right. Yeah.
We moved to Orleans like right when it would have been probably a year out. It was like my second year of high school. So you would have been like in your grade 12 then.
Yeah. Now tell me about, so what's that like? The one thing that I must be of all the aspects of playing pro sports, period.
Yeah.
A lot of players these days have to move around a lot. What's that like to never really know whether or not you're going to be with the team for very
Yeah.
long, or when you get traded and you end up
Yeah.
in Tampa Bay or whatever? What are your thoughts? Are you like, oh, we better rent something, or are we going to buy something, or what are we going to do? Do we move the family over? Or
Yeah. So we always moved our family, no matter where I went. Like
yeah,
even my last contract was with Columbus, and they didn't even have a season. So we knew it might have been like a 2-3 month thing. But I moved to Columbus that summer, set up shop there. Kids all went to school there. And I have a lot of buddies who don't do that. They don't want to uproot their kids. They like with the schools, the neighborhoods, whatever. But both Carolyn and I, we were always like, it would be weird. I would have a hard time not seeing my kids every day. I know with FaceTime and all this, you can manage, but well, I mean, here's the ironic thing. So I played in Vancouver for parts of 6 years. Every older guy on my team was like, buy a place, buy a place, buy a place. Financially, it would have made a ton of sense because those places I would have bought would have been worth 10 times what I would have paid back then.
sure.
But I was a young guy and I was like, I don't know, like, I don't understand. I might get traded. I don't. When I finally got traded, it was a mutual agreement. When I got traded, Brian Burke was super about it. I wasn't playing that much. And he was like, what do you want to do? So I get traded to Tampa. Within probably a week in Tampa, I buy a place because I talked to them and they were like, this is great. Like, you want to be one of our cornerstones.
Mm-hmm.
At the trade deadline, the GM was like, between you, Habib Bullen, Vinny Lecavalier, like, we're never trading you guys. So I played, I think, what was it, 20 some odd games in Tampa. Even the year-end meeting, John Tortorella as a coach. He's like, we were so excited to have a guy like you. We need an older guy, someone steady, someone, the draft. A month later, I get traded. So then I get traded to the Islanders, and New York is a really cool place, special place in our heart. We weren't in the city; we were in Long Island,
Yeah.
and a lot of older homes. We looked at some rentals, and it's like, no, this isn't gonna be it. So we bought a place, and it ended up being great. We lived there for 3 years and a lockout, 4 years, and pretty much everywhere we went after that, we ended up buying because we're like, you know what, we might make money off real estate, we might lose it. It's just part of the gig. I think our kids will be more established because then we can really pick what we want. And, but my wife would have a different experience than I would. Getting traded for me was always kind of fun, something new, something exciting. But when you're packing up a house and moving with 5 kids and your husband's not around, it's not as enjoyable of an experience.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say this, my kids are ridiculously resilient and super social because they've lived everywhere. And it's been really, really good for them. And my wife would say the same about her. We've met so many amazing people throughout North America and obviously Europe. From the Europeans we've met, it's been getting traded and signing free agency and stuff. It's been really cool.
It's a little bit like being an Army brat, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You have your built-in family. And even my son with college, here in the US, everybody's big on fraternities, sororities. And I'm like, he doesn't need that. When you're a freshman on a team, you already have your team. You have your own fraternity. Like, you have your built-in buddies no matter what, no matter where you go. So, and that's kind of the nice thing about, I think people love about sports, is you're always a part of a group.
Yeah. When you get traded, a player, you'll see them, they do the press conference, such and such just got picked up by a team, and every player's got to have some towns in their mind. They're like, I really don't want to end up having to live there or something. You don't mention that kind of stuff. But what are some of the towns that you got traded to, you got picked up by, that you moved there and you were like, really surprised you?
The Islanders.
Yeah.
So I get traded to Tampa from the Canucks, which was obviously a massive change. But Tampa, believe it or not, was very professional. This is a couple of years before they won their first cup. And I was like, wow, this is great. It's kind of, at first, I wouldn't wear shorts to the rink, even though it was like 90 degrees, because I'm like, it just doesn't feel right. And all the other guys look at me like, why are you not wearing shorts? Like, I'm like, I'm here to play hockey. I was kind of so focused on hockey. And then I'm like, they're like, make the most of it too. You could still be a professional and wear short, little innuendos were different.
Yeah. You're referring to wearing shorts rather than showing up in a suit like you'd been taught to do since you played, Yeah.
Yes. So it was like, and like I said, my 2 months in Tampa went really well. Like the coach, like the team. I ended up getting traded at Tampa at the time, I believe was like 29th in the league. I get traded to the Islanders, which was 30th in the league. I'm like, I just got traded to the worst team. Now, as a visiting team, when you play the Islanders, you would stay at this Marriott that was across the 200-yard parking lot from the Nassau Coliseum, which was a shitty building as well.
Hmm.
And the weather was always crappy in the winter. There would always be a ton of like autograph seekers there and fans that really didn't really like you, and it was miserable. I'm like, I just got traded to the worst place in the world. I was like, this is crazy. Fast forward like a couple of weeks, they trade for Michael Pekka, they trade for Yashin. One of my best buddies, Gar Snow's on the team. We have a new coach, Peter Laviolette. So I'm like, okay, we'll just see how it goes. We moved to a town called Garden City, which is one of the, I guess, kind of an affluent neighborhood that's really one of the closer towns to New York City. So a lot of traders are there, a lot of people who are kind of younger and hustle and bustle type. We still are in touch with a dozen families there. We almost retired. When I retired, moved back there. We loved it so much.
Yeah.
It was amazing. And people don't understand how beautiful Long Island, especially in the summer. It's got beaches, it's got golf, it's outdoorsy. You take a train to the city whenever you want. The people are great. And New York is a tough, like, let's say there's a tough persona about it, but I'm like, when you meet a New Yorker and you become friends with them, they're friends for life. They'll give you the shirt off their back. So that's the one place where we were like almost devastated, and it ended up being truly amazing.
Talking about tough fans and being in New York, how often are you, as a pro hockey player, and especially like if you're going through a slump and you already feel pretty lousy yourself about your play and what's going on in your life, what's it like to run into fans who are going to give it to you as well on the street or whatever? Does that happen a lot, or mostly fans been pretty kind to you?
Most are pretty kind. I think nobody wants. I think it's different now because it seems like fans have a little bit more of a voice.
Hmm.
Back when I played, I think they were a little more hardcore, but because once again, the social media, they don't really know you as well. They would only know us from like a 2-minute interview after a game. Like, we
Right.
weren't out doing stuff. We were like, maybe they'd see you at a restaurant or something, you'd talk to them, but it was kind of just a different world. Um, Vancouver, everything was great, even when I wasn't playing good. Islanders was great because it was like a honeymoon. They hadn't made playoffs in like 10 years, and we made the playoffs every year. Um, Calgary was good. The toughest for me was where I played the worst was my 2 years here in Chicago.
Hmm.
It was after the lockout. Dale Talon was the GM. We had a great locker room team. We had great guys. We had kind of character guys, but we did not have a great team. We would have been good prior to the lockout when you could clutch, grab, play a little dirtier. But all of a sudden, the game was all about skill and skating, and we were not good. And I kept getting injured, and I was a captain of the team. And not to say that fans would come up to me and say anything ruthless, but I'm well aware of my level of play at the time and how the team was doing, and being the captain. If things were said, they normally weren't awesome. So it was. I wouldn't say it was tough, but it wasn't awesome.
Right.
So that's part of the game that I always have a hard time when people complain about being a pro athlete, because I'm like, it comes with the territory. If you can't deal with it, maybe it's not for you.
Right.
And it is truly a fantasy life. Like, I know it's hard work, like the hours and dedication. You can ask my wife, the not being around the kids, missing events, whatnot. There's a lot that goes into it, moving your family around, but it truly has been a blessed life for me. So playing a game for a living, making some money, meeting a ton of friends has been awesome. And I know most people don't have the same experience that I've had, because I really don't have many complaints, but it's been awesome.
Well, that brings me to a question I wanted to ask you about. You've got a son who was recently drafted. You've got 5 kids, you said?
Yep, 5 kids.
5 kids.
So my oldest daughter's 21. She goes
Uh-huh.
to University of Iowa. She's in nursing.
Yeah.
I have my 19-year-old son who's a freshman at Harvard.
Yeah.
17-year-old daughter who's a senior at school. She's picking colleges right now. Then 14 and 12-year-old boys. So 2 girls and 3 boys.
And did the girls play hockey as well?
My youngest daughter played until COVID hit. Yeah, she was pretty
Yeah.
good. Their team. So as with everything now, everything is well known. Everything's out there. You can find whatever you want on the internet. Her team, when she quit, was actually ranked number 1 in the nation. Like
Wow.
they were like a really good team. And she loved the game. She loved, like, she's like the spark plug. She loves like the locker room. And she was like having fun, but she wasn't having as much fun playing. And she was like, Dad, and a lot of kids from her team will get scholarships to play. And she's like, I don't think I'm good enough to get to go to a school where I really want to go. So if I quit and just study work on my school, and she's already really smart, she goes, just concentrate on my grades, I'll be able to go to whatever school I want to go to. And it was a very mature conversation. She was a little afraid of me being disappointed. I'm like, if you're happy, I'm happy. So it's been really good for her.
Was there anything about playing professional hockey that you thought, oh, this aspect of it, I don't really want to see my kids go through it? Or was it just everything was a great experience? I'd love for my kids to be able to have that same experience themselves if they can.
Like I said, I'm very lucky because even though there's been some real downside to some of the things that have happened throughout a hockey player's career and my career,
Mm-hmm.
it would be a dream come true for them to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Even now, I mean, the stuff, I guess nowadays coaches can't say the stuff that coaches used to say to me, but, injuries were a massive issue. Making a mistake on national TV and everybody seeing you, shoot the puck in your own net, like things like that can happen are devastating, but the pros outweigh the cons times a million.
Yeah.
And I think the nice thing too is because of my experiences of dealing with a tough coach or negative something is I can help them with it. And I think our kids know way more than we know, and especially the boys alone. So I've coached them all. I coached my oldest, and now I'm coaching the two younger ones. The stuff that we talk to about them is life lessons more than hockey half the time.
Right.
And I don't think we always learned that at our age. We were kind of younger, and it was just like, it wasn't at the same level. There just wasn't the same knowledge maybe. And luckily I was coached by some really good people, so I didn't have to worry about it. But now it's, like even prime examples, like if a player makes a bad play, and I'm like, everybody makes mistakes. What are you going to do next? You get these scouts watching you. Are you going to come and bang your stick and mope? And they know you're a good player because all three of my boys, the teams that we're lucky here in Chicago, hockey's really good. So a lot of players move on. They know you're a good player, but they want to know what type of kid you are. It's like when you're hiring someone for a business, oh, he graduated from a good school. He's smart, but you have to know what kind of person they are. And that's the stuff that, me and the other coaches that I work with, that's the stuff that we kind of harp on quite a bit.
Well, that's something I've heard come up with different pro sports teams, or that you see a team and they're, well, you're like, well, there's a great bunch of players that play for that team, and then the organization will say the first thing we looked for was we wanted to get character players, and it seemed like obviously they were highly adept at playing that sport as well, but just getting character players was just a massive hurdle to get over, and lining up all those players that work well together. That's
yeah. Well, as you know, it doesn't matter what type of team it is, sport, business, any work. If you have people that can gel together and assimilate well, and it just makes for a great experience, and it could be so much more productive. And, in the hockey world, just like anything else, there's going to be a few selfish people, a few guys that don't gel, but if you can deal with one or two, and because you just work with them. But when you have a big group, it's hard. Like it could be hard, and you'll see some teams like that. And most of the time, especially in hockey, the teams that win the Stanley Cups are the teams that come together and, support each other and, really help each other out there. So and a lot of times it starts from the top, whether it be the owner, the president, general manager, coaches, all the way down to the trainers. It's definitely a real team sport.
right. What did you enjoy most about playing NHL hockey? Not so much the sport aspect of it, but just,
Correct. I think, what's funny is I was never super clicky, and most sports are very clicky, which makes sense. You're going to gravitate to the people that you like the most. And, we had a trainer for the Islanders who was a medical trainer for the Jets. And he would say, some of these guys on the team don't even know each other. Of course, there's way more people. There's offense, there's defense in football. But he would say, so for the New York Jets, but he would say, you would have a religious group. Back then you would have like the white guys hanging around together. You'd have the black guys hanging around. Like these people wouldn't even interact.
Yeah.
I would be better friends with certain guys on a team, but I was the guy who would go out with the rookies for dinner. I would go with when I was a rookie, I'd go with the old guys for dinner. I'd go out with the European guys for dinner. I would go out with, the forwards for dinner. I'd hang out with the goalies all the time. And I don't, of course, I probably have a few best friends in the league, but I was kind of the guy who just kind of hung out with everyone. And I always said, man, and you hear this a lot, especially in hockey, like the one thing when guys retire, of course, there's the competition, right? But the locker room is something where it's just, the banter, the coming in after even a hard practice, or having you get a day off and guys had a great night out and you come in the next day and you have a great practice and you sweat it out and the guys are hanging there and just laughing and telling stories. And even when I was in Arizona, just the kids coming in the locker room, because we actually had a very old team. We had like 31 kids on our team, which I've played on. I think when I was in Columbus, we had 3 kids or 4 kids. Well, I had 5 alone, so maybe there's 3 other kids. But the locker room and just having it's like a clubhouse. It's such a safe environment that it was so much fun.
What's your proudest moment in terms of being a professional hockey player?
I guess, I don't know, it'd be hard. I don't know. It's kind of weird, as most hockey players would always say, everything is kind of team oriented. Some of the coolest thing, I really don't know, proudest, maybe when I was voted by the team as captain for the Blackhawks.
Yeah.
Playing 1,000 games, because that's something that's another
huge.
thing you don't think about it as a kid or even when you break into the league. That's, I was listening to those guys with the Hall of Fame speeches, and they're like, you don't think of the Hall of Fame when you're starting to play. You just want to be relevant. You just want to play. You're so excited. So playing 1,000 games, for me, one of the reasons why that one was so big is because we had people flying from everywhere, from like New York. I was in Arizona at the time. We had people from all over Canada come down, from New York, Chicago, from like other teams where we met neighbors, from Columbus. Like it was, I hadn't gone to Columbus yet. But we had all these people come down, and we got a big suite, and then the team had a party after, and just the speeches that were there was truly like, it was amazing. I didn't realize how big it was a deal until it actually happened. And even in the hockey world, it's cool to play 1,000 games, but it's not the biggest, prize at all. And then just for hockey wise, I played one All-Star game, and it was very exciting to get chosen to play in the All-Star game. But it was actually at the All-Star event, meeting a bunch of Hall of Famers, and them treating me like I was basically the same as them. And what I've learned in my career is those guys treat most people like that anyways, or if not everyone like that. Mm-hmm. But it was such a cool environment. I remember waiting for a bus. It was in Minnesota. We're going back to the hotel. It was 40 below zero. And I'm with my dad and my brother. I can't remember if Carolyn was, I know she was in Minnesota, but she might've been back at the hotel. And I remember like Rob Blake comes over, he's one of the guys I modeled my game after. He was a stud. And he just starts talking to my dad and brother for 20 minutes. And you're in the locker room, and Jerry Moronic would come over and talk to them, and you're walking by here, and it's just, so that was a very cool environment, not only for me but for my dad and brother, because they didn't know these guys and they've watched them forever. So it was cool. And the one thing I talked about a lot is because I'd mentioned a lot of my buddies back home, a lot of them kind of lived their dream through me, and I totally understood that. They probably wanted to be in the NHL more than I did when I was a young kid.
Right.
When I grew and got older, for sure, it was my passion. But early on, that was their big thing. So whenever we'd play in Ottawa, I'd bring them down to the locker room. Whenever they'd come visit me, they'd be in the locker rooms. They'd meet all the guys. Whenever we'd play in Montreal and go out after game for dinner, I'd make sure that they were around. And stuff like that, I just love, where people get to understand how, like, down to earth most of the players are.
Yeah.
They're really regular guys. And the guys who remember that are always really fun to be around.
One thing that comes up a lot that I hear a lot from hockey players, athletes, about leaving their game, retiring, is something I hear all the time from soldiers as well. It's that the thing that the players seem to miss the most is that camaraderie, that being with brothers in arms and fighting those battles together and being in the trenches for all those years. It seems like players mostly miss that.
100% true. It's not only the camaraderie, but like you said, it's the going into battles. And if you think about it, especially like in my case, it was almost 20 years of me getting aggression out and, competing and being exhausted and having, so there's always that. And you see a lot of athletes, and you hear about a lot of times it's not only, the family guy maybe getting divorced. A lot of times it's the wife now who has the husband home, who's like, okay, it was easier when you were on the road more,
Hmm.
now all of a sudden a husband comes home. He's like, oh, this is how you're raising the kids. Like, no, this is how it should be done. So there's lots of different vibes going on. For me, it was great because I've always really been a family guy. When I retired, I was jumped right into it with the kids and I was really busy. A lot of people who don't have something to be busy with, it becomes a bit of a grind. And, then they try to find something and it doesn't work. And they try to find something else and it doesn't work. And I also worked for the Blackhawks for a little bit as a player development guy. So that kind of helped. And that I realized I didn't really want to be traveling again. So I did that for a year and a half, but it was fun. And I helped some of the young guys who were, the minor league guys getting called up to the Blackhawks and win Stanley Cup. So it was really enjoyable. But basically being around my family is what I missed and what I love the most.
Yeah. Well, you talked earlier about the NHLPA and some of the initiatives that they had in terms of spousal abuse and different issues that can come up with human beings and not just hockey players. But did you put a lot of thought into what you were going to do after, your second career 2.0, Adrian?
I kind of did while I was playing, and because I played and was involved in hockey basically my entire life, which most players are, but I was a lot older, when I retired than a lot of these guys, I was okay with retirement. I turned 40. Columbus actually wanted me to play another year. And I was like, I can't keep up. Like, this is crazy. And they were like, more like, okay, just be in our locker room. Then they offered me an assistant coach job because they really wanted me around. And even then it'd be like, I'll be at the rink every day again and I'll travel. So I assumed even though I said no, I assumed it would be something involved in hockey because I enjoyed the coaching aspect. I was older than some of the coaches when I retired. I thought management, but management, these guys, it's a grind. Coaches, it's a grind.
Media? Was that ever a thought?
You know what? I honestly thought it would be very enjoyable doing like radio. I would not like to be on camera because I hate to say it. When I watch half these guys who retire, I just, I find I can pick them apart. I think some of the stuff they do. So I think radio, it's not as personal.
Mm-hmm.
I always enjoyed that side of it, but it just, once I retired, I did the Blackhawk thing. And then I started coaching my kids. And at the time I had 4 kids who were playing, and it basically consumed all day, at least every weeknight, every weekend I was gone. There was one year where I think I was gone 21 weekends in a row for their tournaments, between the 4 of them. So now I'm only coaching 2 of them. So I have a little bit more time to myself, but, there's always options. I have a lot of neighbors who are like, do you want to do anything? And I truly don't think I have a passion for anything that I would want to jump into.
Yeah.
I mean, I would love to fish every day, but I don't want to do that as my job.
Right.
But so coaching the kids has been great for me. So I love it, and I with the whole turnover with the whole Blackhawks organization right now, people have asked if I'd get back involved with them, and not right now. I mean, I still, my youngest is 12 and I love coaching him. So I wouldn't want to be on the road again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, in 2021, you're 48 now, right?
Yep.
That's pretty young.
Yeah.
Hopefully you'll have a lot of years ahead of you and all kinds of different adventures. It certainly seems like, you walk away from an NHL career that people know your name, that can open up a lot of different doors for a person.
Well, it helps, and that's actually something that I've talked to the younger guys about because of my length of career. I would explain to them that use it as a tool, right? But you can't expect the same, let's say, leeway or benefits. Like I said, when I first started playing in Vancouver, they had just lost to the Rangers in the finals. It was like celebrity status. You go anywhere, you're like, oh, hey, we'll give you a car to drive if you come to our dealership, sign autographs. Hey, they'll throw a little bit of cash at you if you want to come and talk to the kid. There's always something going on.
Mm-hmm.
And some guys have a hard time when they don't have that status anymore. So I explained to them, like, man, make sure you're able to, to deal with that. And, you could still be involved in hockey if you want, but don't necessarily let that be your defining thing. It's you being a good person. And I know it sounds a little, corny or whatever, but there's a lot more to life than just hockey. And I would always try to tell the young guys that early. So I'm like, meet your neighbors, like when they have a barbecue in their backyard next door, if you're a little tired, just go over and say hello to them, because some of these guys are going to be friends for life.
Yeah.
And one of the coolest things about when my son was getting recruited to all these schools, it was at Harvard, they don't room with hockey players the first year, which I thought was crazy. I'm like, man, that's kind of who I had to live with. I was with my hockey teammates when I went to college, and
Right.
they're like, no, like you might be rooming with the next president. You might be rooming with the next Mark Zuckerberg. You need to like expand your horizons. And they're very big on meeting other people. And my son, that's one thing he keeps talking about. I've met so many cool people here in the first few months. I'm like, that's like an amazing experience that a lot of people don't have the opportunity to have.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense for sure. Yeah, that's actually yeah, that's a pretty smart way to do it.
Yeah.
Um, uh, Finally, I was going to ask you, what's the best piece of advice you were given that you could pass on to next generation of hockey player coming up?
Um, Not the best advice is not really even hockey related. It's treat people the way you want to be treated. Another thing my dad would always say, right? Like that was my dad is, I mean, you remember him from obviously going back 40 years ago. He was
Yeah.
just a very nice, quiet guy, but ridiculously smart and very like the most honest person I've ever met. Um, and then of course it's, like I said earlier, it's everybody's hoping for that one shot when you're going to be the right place at the right time, but you got to be ready at that time. And I was lucky enough because I used to kind of say, oh, I came to Vancouver, they needed a D, and I was lucky enough, right place, right time. Guys got injured, and it was actually someone else, and I don't remember who said it, but they're like, yeah, but there's hundreds of players who get that opportunity, or maybe even more, thousands, but you actually took it and you were ready for it and you used it. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, the same thing goes in life. Wherever you get, when you do get those chances, if you're not ready for it, then you might miss out.
Yeah, there's an expression that I've heard in the entertainment business, and it applies to any business. I mean, just in general, you should just be kind to people. I mean, that's
Yeah,
just the best way to live.
it
But
works.
they used to say, be good to all the people as you're sort of going up the hill, because you meet all those people as you come back the other side.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's true. We think of all the people we've met in our lives who, if you're only nice to the people you think you could get something from, like it doesn't go over. And we see that a lot in, entertainment industry and in sports. It's if you forget sometimes, that it doesn't matter who you're talking to. It's like the old saying, like, what are you doing when people aren't watching you?
Hmm.
Or are you just like showing up when, oh, there's a scout here, so now I'm going to play well, or now I'm going to be a good guy. And I mean, there's so many sayings like that in the sports and entertainment business. If you truly are honest and do the same thing all the time, then it's pretty easy. Like they know what they're getting, and
Yeah.
you don't have to put on a charade or whatever. So it's kind of words to live by, I guess.
Yeah, the golden rule, right?
Yep.
Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. If you can do that, you'll do all right in life,
Yep.
no matter what
So
you do.
true.
Look, Adrian, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. Yeah, I'll mention something else about you and other people I know who succeeded in various endeavors growing up. I never had any illusion that I was going to play NHL hockey. I liked playing, novice Pee Wee Bantam, and that was a great part of my experience. But you know, growing up and seeing Adrian Aucoin, seeing Aaron Ward, seeing a couple of the guys I knew in town who played CFL, a couple of guys actually made it to the NFL, and then artists and musicians, and seeing those people growing up and achieving stuff was really cool, even if it wasn't in my sphere. It's just amazing to see other people around you who come from the same place who achieve great things.
Yep.
And that's so necessary. And it's fun to see people like you grow and do the thing that you got to do that you love the most at such a high level. It's always great to have that around you and pay attention to those people. So it was cool to see you managing that world and breaking out and being, such a stellar defenseman in the league. That was a really cool thing, just from my perspective. And I think everybody needs that, right? You need to be able to look around and see other people from your community who are thriving.
Yeah. Well,
So
it's a nice way to, I always said that one of the coolest things about, being on TV for anything, be hockey, sports, entertainment, whatever, it's a way to stay connected with someone. Now obviously social media very different, but it is nice when you can follow someone that and even in my world, I didn't watch a ton of hockey when I was a kid. I watched more hockey when I played in the NHL. because now I knew these guys, so I would follow them. And if I would
Mm.
do a charity event with an NFL player, then I'm a fan for life because he was a good guy. And it is like, I think you kind of said it best. It's so nice to see people do well, and and you can actually follow it, and it almost becomes a, part of you a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like I said, that was a really cool thing to be able to watch. Thanks so much again for your time, Adrian. It was great to reconnect after all these years. Congrats on your career. And I wish the best for your kids as they move forward and attack their dreams. I know it sounds like you're going to be a part of that for every step of the way. So good luck to your kids, and all the best to your family.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Really appreciate it.
All right. Cheers. My thanks to Adrian Aucoin for sharing his cool story. Throughout our conversation, Adrian describes his ascent in the hockey world with a lot of humility, pointing out that there were often better players throughout his career that did not enjoy the same opportunities that he did. It is a testament to his talent and work ethic that he chose to accept those opportunities, however, and meet and exceed expectations every single time. The amount of work that he has put in over the years to play at that level is truly extraordinary. I'm also so impressed that he has put in so much time and effort beyond retirement to make sure that his 5 kids get to enjoy similar opportunities to the ones that he did. I'm proud to know Adrian Aucoin, and I'm proud to say that he grew up in the very special place that is Blackburn Hamlet. My thanks as always go to Mr. Jerry Stamp, who wrote and performed the Cool Story theme song and all of the jingles and stings that appear on the show. Do yourselves a favor and look for Jerry's music wherever you stream, and then pop by Apple Music and support Jerry by buying some of his music. And finally, thank you for listening. Until next time, pura vida.
Everybody's had some adventures. Everybody's had a few close calls. Everybody's got a story.